have also visited us here in the past, when you come to the station, you're operating just as W1AW. You are now the control operator when you get on the air as W1AW. And like W3D, when you get on the air, you'd usually generate a pilot. Now, what I meant by very few exceptions, there have only been a couple of times that a call sign other than W1AW was used here, and it had to be for a very specific reason. Many of you probably know or remember Doug DeMaw, W1FB. Well, some years back, Ed Hare, W1RFI, who is our lab dad and our boss here, actually found the original tuna tin, the little transmitter that Doug DeMaw had designed. And they had gotten permission from the trustee at the time, who was Dave Sumner, K1ZZ, to use that tuna tin here at W1AW. So you had a little 100 milliwatts into a 5-element antenna, you can do the math. And the trustee at the time had granted the permission for us to use W1FB using Doug DeMaw's transmitter. But normally it's always W1AW. Now, our primary mission here is the transmission of code practice and bulletins. It's done on CW, digital, and by that I mean RTTY, which is the old standby, the favorite, PSK31, and MFSK16. We also have a single phone bulletin at 9:45 p.m. Eastern Time daily. Now, I want to show you, and I'm going to try to move this slowly, so hopefully the camera is not going to jitter too much. But right now, we are actually transmitting what we call our fast code practice. And I'm not too sure if you can see that, but these are the transmitters that we're using. And I'm just going to open the door a little bit and kind of. Okay, it's quiet right now because the air conditioning isn't running. But, we are currently transmitting simultaneously on 160, 80, 40, 20, 17, 15, 10, 6, and 2 meters, running anywhere from 800 to 1,000 watts, depending upon the band. Now, you may be able to make out where it says Harris on the racks here. Well, we're not really using Harris equipment anymore. When we renovated the station in 1989, we were using Harris stuff, but we have since replaced all that. We're actually now using all amateur grade equipment. We're using primarily ICOMs with some Yaesu and, well, I had a Kenwood in there as the exciters. We also have an Alpha 8410 on 160 for the amplifier, an Alpha 87A amplifier on 80. We have ACOM 2000s on 40, 20, 17, and 15 meters. On 10 meters, we're using an ICOM ICPW1. And on 6 meters, we normally use a Harris Platinum amplifier, which I have to do some work on. And on 2 meters, we're actually using a Mirage amplifier. Now, for 2 meters, we're running FM, and that is to cover primarily the local area here. Although they have on occasion, when conditions allowed it, they have heard us as far north as Springfield and as far east as, far west as New York. And on occasion, you can hear us in Rhode Island. So here we are transmitting right now. And the equipment we use, and hopefully you can see this, I may have to bend this down a little bit. You can see that computer, that's what we're using right now to transmit the CW. And that sends keying signals over to a keying matrix, which handles both the PTT as well as all the CW keying. Now that is still, it may look familiar to it. It's a DOS program. We are going to be upgrading that to Windows 10, hopefully this year. Now what you're looking at here, hopefully you can see it, and bring down the camera a little bit. This is the control console, and this is used primarily for all of our scheduled transmissions for all the broadcast equipment. And by the way, I use the term broadcast purely in a technical sense, and I'll get to that in a little bit. The mixer board is used to take audio from the program FLDigi, which we use for our digital transmissions, as well as the microphone for our phone bulletins. The mixer board is actually a holdover for when we did have Harris stuff in there, because that was commercial grade equipment that required balanced audio. And if I can do this a little bit there, hopefully you can see it. That control panel there controls the power to all the transmitters, both the regular just AC power as well as the keying. If necessary, and usually I do this for testing, I can key all the transmitters simultaneously, or if necessary, one transmitter at a time, or even just take it off air if I really had to. Below that, we can monitor our line voltage. We have our own high voltage tap, which is kind of cool. And we also have our generator connection from there. Now, going back to, and I know Tim is familiar with this, but we have this patch panel. I think you can see, yeah, let me actually get a little closer here. The joys of tethered. This patch panel here, let me take some of the glare off, allows us to attach each antenna that we have to each one of the operating positions, which again, I'll show you in a little bit. Each one of these connections represents an antenna and an individual radio in each one of the studios. We can patch in the rotators depending upon the tower as well as the operating studio. And of course, antenna patch panel we use for all of the regular transmitting equipment. Those are normally kept connected because obviously this is the bulk of our transmissions, our scheduled transmissions. Whereas this equipment here for visitor operations, it's always hit or miss depending upon the band and the radio being used. Let me just shut this door. Go back to here. Is the audio still okay? Okay, cool. So I mentioned broadcasts, and I always like to mention this in my presentation because some individuals, some amateur radio operators still don't quite understand what allows us to do this and how as HQ staff we can be paid. Well, it actually goes back decades ago where the SEC started with this whole pecuniary interest. Now, as many may know, we were transmitting from here using both volunteers and paid staff since the 30s, and there was never an issue. Well, when it started to become an issue, the Aero actually went to the FCC and said, okay, look, as you know, we do these transmissions. We are transmitting simultaneously on multiple bands. What can we do or what can you do to allow us to legally do this? And so essentially, the SEC came up with that section of Part 97.113. And the very first line of that states, a control operator may receive compensation provided the following is done. And that is to provide a minimum of 40 hours a week code practice, or CW transmissions, have a schedule that is published 30 days in advance, be on a minimum, it says minimum, of 6 HF and medium frequency bands simultaneously, and to take necessary actions to provide maximum coverage. So in the eyes of the FCC, as long as we're doing that, as long as we are providing a service to all amateur radio operators, not just Aero members, but all ham radio operators, then we are allowed to receive compensation. Now, in terms of broadcasting, technically, yes, this is a one-way transmission. I'm not sending out a CQ and having somebody come back to me. We went to the FCC on that many years ago to say, okay, if we get a question, how do we define that? Well, in the minds of the FCC, a broadcast is any transmission which is meant for everyone. Well, even though any person with a shortwave receiver can monitor our transmissions, the fact remains that my transmissions are specific to amateur radio operators only. Who cares who can copy it? But unless you're a ham, you probably won't care what we're transmitting. Because our audience is specific, regardless of who can hear it, the specific audience is what makes it legal for us to do this. Now, obviously, if I started transmitting stuff about book sales or membership or what's going on in the community, then I have actually crossed the line. I am now broadcasting because the content of my transmissions can be of interest to anyone. But because they're not, we are allowed to do this in the eyes of the FCC. And again, I normally once a year, I will get that question from somebody that asks, why can we do this and why can we legally do this? And it's very matter of fact that we've gone to the FCC. I have on a number of occasions had the FCC here. Raleigh Hollingsworth has been here a lot during his time. Laura Smith has been here a number of times. They have been here when we've been transmitting, and unless they're not telling me something, there has never been a problem with it. They have always been very mad. Okay, that's cool how you do that. We show them how we do it. We show them how we ID, generally every 10 minutes. We show them how we keep with the rules in terms of the 30-day announcement of the schedule. And they have never had a problem with it because, again, as long as we are following the rules, we're following the rules. They have no issue with what we're doing here. So what I'd like to do is now take you on a little tour of the station. And again, if you've been here in the past, some of these places may be recognizable to you. This here is our first operating studio. I'm kind of looking at the monitor and looking at what I'm transmitting and seeing at the same time. Now this is our first studio, and in here, let's see if I can get a little better. Whoop. We have, for visitor operating use, which we haven't had visitors since early March, unfortunately, we have a Yaesu FTDX 9000 that's coupled up to an ACOM 2000. We also have in the corner an ICOM IC 7700, and that's married up to an IC PW1. Now, I don't have visitors coming in right now. I truly miss having visitors here. It's sometimes kind of lonely during the day because obviously staff can't come over here. But it has allowed me to be able to do some stuff right now. So you're going to be seeing a lot of disorganization, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is the first operating studio. Any licensed radio operator, does not have to be a member, but any licensed ham radio operator can come in here, operate the station, and use the call sign. They can only use our call sign. They cannot do WNAW / their call or anything of that nature, or make contacts with their call. That's the big thing. And they can operate on those bands and modes granted by their license class. Now this is the first studio. Now here, and I apologize for the jitteriness, is our second studio. And we actually have 3 operating positions in here. We have an IC 9100, which is used for satellite. And actually right now, because of the hurricanes, I am using SAT PC32 to adjust my 2-meter antenna, because it'll still work, for our weather reception. So I can actually look at the hurricanes when they come over. We also have an IC 7000 and a Yaesu FT2000, again, all used for visitor operations in here. The monitors are off right now. We also have our WinLink 2000 2-meter node in here, and we also have our APRS transmitting here as well. In the third studio, of course, you can see all the signage we have to have up. We have a Yaesu FTDX 5000 that's married up to a Quadra, and a Kenwood TS590, and that is married up to the Alpha 9500 amplifier. Now over here, this is where it's going to get a little messy. Told you it was messy. We have here, it's messy. Our 2 D-Star radios. We have our Mars station here because we are Alpha Alpha Radio 1 Radio Lima. We can do digital from here as well. And right now, because W1W comes under the laboratory, we're assisting them with some Prodigy stuff. And actually, this radio over here is the FTDX, no, this is the FT101DX. And I'm going to be checking out the SCU LAN 10, which is the remote control box. We have an NN7000 DLE under here, which I had to get going so we can do some checking of that as well. And that's why you see all this networking cable. Like I said, it's kind of a mess, but right now, because I don't have visitors, I can take this opportunity to do any of the testing that I need to. Now, before we had audio CW, we had Spark. And what we have here, and hopefully my tether will follow, is Old Betsy, which is Hiram Percy Maxim's original rotary spark gap transmitter. And she still functions. I'm not sure if I'll get a spark out of her, but she still functions. Essentially, what we do is we key a high voltage, 120 volts, over to a triac keyer. That triac keyer puts the 120, it allows me to key it with low voltage or the safety hazard. That puts the 120 volts onto the high voltage transformer that generates about 12,000 volts AC, places that voltage across the condenser and through this oscillation transformer, and puts it across the 2 points here on this 4-point rotary spark gap. We're using a Morse code key, so the voltage is generated with Morse code intelligence behind it. This is spinning at about 2,000 RPM. We will get a small arc. That arc energy is then transferred through the oscillation transformer, and that's where it would go into the antenna system. So if you will bear with me, I'm going to see, and see if I'm just going to lower this a little bit. I'm going to see if I can get her to spark. I haven't ground on the points a little bit, but let's see if she'll go. I'm not sure if you saw that, but if you saw the bright light, we actually have a small LED light that acts as a load. And when we get a good arc, we get a nice bright light. But she's a little tired. I have to do some work on her. Okay, let me bring this back up. Now here we are in the foyer of W1EW, and this foyer was actually added back in the late 60s when they actually built the original headquarters. This was actually 1967. And this is kind of the museum area. Let me just back it off a little bit. So we do have some pieces that are on display. Some of this equipment here was actually used here at W1EW originally. And some pieces on display were also bits that were owned by Hiram Percy Maxim himself. And over here, move this down here. Again, it's messy. What you're seeing now is Hiram Percy Maxim's roll-top desk. This actually was donated back to us from family members. We actually got it back in 2008. They essentially ran out of family members to loan it to, but we do know the history of it. And what you're seeing actually right now with all these internet cables and so on is ARDEN, which is the Amateur Radio Emergency Data Network. And we're doing some testing with that. Again, I don't have visitors right now, so it gives me an opportunity to do all this testing. And that's why you see the 5 gigahertz radome there, the 900 megahertz system there. We actually have on our tower 3 5 gigahertz units and 1 900 megahertz unit. And finally, and Tim, I know you'll appreciate this, our shop. It's never clean. If it did look clean, that means we weren't doing anything. But we do try to build stuff here. We do try to make repairs here. So this is our shop. It's kind of awesome, kind of messy too, but we love it. So what I'd like to do is, again, I apologize for the jarring. Bring this back up. There we go. I'm going to try, I've never done this, I've done Zoom presentations, but I never actually shared the screen. I'm going to try to show you some pictures that I took today of the towers. So if you'll just bear with me for a moment, let's see if I can get this to work. Let's see, we're going to share. Okay, so we want to share whiteboard, iPad, oh, files, here we go. Huh. Well, there you go. I was going to share with you files that I had on the desktop, but unless I'm doing this wrong, and Tim, I'll defer to you if you can walk me through it maybe, was files of the pictures I took of the towers. And apparently when I hit share screen, all it says is to go to Dropbox or to Google Drive or something like that. So I can't show you the towers. But I'll give you a quick description. We have 3 60-foot self-supporting SSVs, and we have one 120-foot Roan 65 tower. The Roan 65 holds predominantly all of our transmitting, our broadcast antennas, with 2 antennas on top, a 40-20 meter, which are rotatable, which are used by the visitors. My north satellite and south towers, which are the 60-foot towers, house mainly the antennas that we use for both visitor operations, but also some of the other stuff we do, like the satellite operation, as well as the antennas we use for APRS and WinLink 2000, and also D-Star. So, as I mentioned earlier, the rules for coming down to operating are pretty simple. You just have to be a licensed ham radio operator. You want to be able to get on the air someday, hopefully. Get on the air, have some fun operating, put W1W's call on the air, and just have a lot of fun operating. So that's pretty much it. It's she's an awesome station. She's little, but it's a fun place to be and a fun place to operate. And I will turn it back over to our moderator.
Okay, very good, Joe. I want to make sure everybody, if you haven't clicked in the upper right-hand area where it says speaker view, that'll make Joe's presentation much larger for you. And we are recording tonight, so with Corey's help, we'll have this recording on the w3lif.org website soon. Joe, how long have you worked at the ARRL?
Can I lie, or do you really want to know?
Oh, I really want to know.
Oh, you really want to know? 2014, 36 years.
Wow.
I actually started out right out of college because I needed a job. Started out in QSL, and Tim, actually, I think that's probably the first time we met.
Yes.
I distinctly remember a like 36-pound box of cards. Your QSL cards. So started out in QSL, worked in VEC. Like a lot of staff, a lot of us, including my night operator Scott, had spent some time in DXCC with Don Search, W3AZD, who's now an SK, unfortunately. Also in awards, back to QSL out of VEC, and then here as its manager. Took over in 96.
96. And so you've been in the at W1AW since 96.
Yep.
And that's an incredible 36-year career there. And, you know, I know you're not getting rich. And I know you're doing it because you love this hobby and you love the ARRL. And I want to thank you for everything you do to make all of us that visit you welcome, and to make sure that we can listen to W1AW on the air, whether it's code practice or bulletins. And I also think it's very impressive the way new technology has been worked into the W1AW station. And, you know, you talked about the 5 gig project, you talked about WinLink, you talked about satellites, are all part of what you're doing. And I really applaud you and your staff for staying on top of the emerging technologies.
Well, we do try. I mean, there's some things here that, actually, it's very few things that I don't support. For example, I don't have any SSTV equipment here, even though I could, because quite frankly, in terms of what the visitors want, at least 85 to almost 90% of the visitors just want to get on phone. And that's cool. We never tell any of the visitors what mode they should use. If a visitor wants to run phone, that's cool. If a visitor wants to run CW, that's awesome as well, or even a little bit of digital. And right now, a lot of it has been FT8. But I have zero call for slow scan television. if we were to start to see some new change, some new emerging technology that allows it to be even better. I know there's EasyPal and so on and so forth, and similar things. Then sure, we would adopt that in here as well. But in terms of these regular technologies that are here right now, we do have a DRM repeater in the laboratory. We have access to that. We have IRLP access from here as well. We are experimenting with Arden. We have SDR equipment that we are experimenting with. The plan is to eventually get more SDR stuff in here. We actually had a Flex 5000 years ago. And maybe have limited remote operating from here. That's still up in the air. But we try to keep on top of it as best we could. And yeah, it is a little limited because of obviously the finances here. But you mentioned the love of this place. Well, I grew up 4 miles down the road from here. And as a pre-Johnny Novice, even as I was a little Johnny Novice, there was a shopping center not a mile down the road. And when we'd go there, I'd bug my mom to bring me over here. And I love telling the story because I can just think that Chuck Bender, who was the former station manager, is now a Silent Key, what he must have thought every time he saw my face at that back door. Thinking, oh, great, here's that little kid again. Why does he keep bothering me? And so now, to have been from that little kid, pre-novice, and then eventually novice, coming to the door whenever I could, just to come in here and look around and see it. And now to be here is truly an honor. And yeah, we're just a bunch of hams here. We are a not-for-profit, so you're counting about getting rich. Yeah, but it's bigger than that because it's not just hams just doing stuff. This is important what we do. It's important to the amateur community. It's important to the community in general. I mean, especially now because of the hurricanes right now, because of the communications. One of your other members was talking earlier about the hospitals and the VoIP, and if the internet goes down, that's it. They lose communications. Well, as hams, we know how to adapt to this extremely easy, and we do that here now. And that's all part of it. It's all part of the technology. That's all part of the science and mystery of amateur radio.
It's an incredible story. I mean, your story is incredible. The W1AW story is incredible. And I think you have found your dream job. And so I'm so thankful that you're there and for everything you do. So I want to open it up to our members to ask questions. Here we have Joe Garcia, NJ1Q, who is the station manager of ARL headquarters, W1AW. So just unmute and ask your question to Joe. This is a once in a lifetime thing. This is great, Joe. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Joe, this is Harry W3YJ. Hey, I've done a lot of work through the years with FL Digi and a lot of work with Dave, W1HKJ.
Yes.
How are you using FL Digi at W1AW?
Right now, FL Digi is being used to transmit all of our digital stuff. Our RTTY, PSK31, and MFSK on a revolving schedule. And prior to that, we were using MixW, but there was a language barrier issue. There was also a support issue. And it was actually when Dave had come up with FL Digi that it was suggested to me. And I think it was actually Dave who said, I've got this program that does all this. And oh, by the way, it's free. And sure enough, that's when we actually started to incorporate FL Digi. Now, our digital transmissions switch modes. And it's on a revolving schedule. One day we're doing RIDI, PSK, MFSK. The next day we're doing RIDI, PSK, or rather MFSK, PSK, and then RTTY. With Dave's help, we actually created a number of macros for each daily transmission that allows the transmission to change modes in the midst of a transmission. So if you had helped with that, I thank you very much. Now, to the other side of that, earlier this year, actually late last year, I went back to Dave to say, Dave, we really want to use FL Digi as our transmitting software, both for digital and now CW. And at the time, the CW was purely audio. And I didn't want to transmit audio CW. I wanted that nice keying that you had, that hard keying that you actually get with each transmitter. And of course, now the program does that. It has a Win key interface to it, regular serial port keying. And so, as I think you're involved in that too, we were going back and forth with Dave to work on, to work on the program to get it to where we can now use FLDigi for both the CW and all of our digital transmissions. Our phone transmission will always be read live. There's something romantic about reading the phone transmission live. I love doing it. Scott loves doing it because you're actually talking live into that thing. But for CW and digital, it's just a matter of time. I'm having some issues working on the macros because there's just so many different files and structure to it. But once that's done, FLDigi will be used for the CW and the digital transmissions. So again, any work that you had done in that, I truly thank you very much.
Okay, I've been involved just in a little bit of the testing, just tangentially. I was aware of it, but I've been working with Dave on other things with FLDigi through the years. So thank you. And he's done a great job, and he's a real asset to amateur radio. Thank you.
Oh, I love talking with him on the phone. He's cool. He's a cool guy.
Other questions for Joe? This is a great opportunity to tune in to ARRL here with W1AW. Other questions for Joe?
Yeah, this is Jim, K7JN.
I
I'm wondering about your Spark system. Have you ever coupled it to an antenna and actually transmitted?
You know, we've joked about doing that. We thought that, that would be kind of fun if we just hooked up the antenna system and tried to transmit. Unfortunately, Spark transmission of CW is illegal. So the best we can do, I know, sometimes you think, there's somebody I really don't like on the air. I'm going to set up some Spark and just wipe out the entire band. But what we do is having that small antenna on there with the light as a load at least allows us to demonstrate it. Now, what's interesting is that, again, when I had visitors, if I had visitors operating here, but I also had visitors just coming in, especially during the summertime, we're always heavy with visitors. If I'm demonstrating old Betsy and I'm getting a good arc out of her, I completely wipe out all the visitors. They just can't hear anything while I'm transmitting because it's fairly broad. But no, unfortunately we can't. We could, but we can't legally put an antenna on that system. And there have been a number of pieces to that of old Betsy that have actually been lost to history. We know that some pieces are with the family, but there's an article in July 1920 issue of QST, the July September 1920 issue of QST, that actually has a picture of Hiram's station, including old Betsy, as well as where he had it located. It was actually located in his cellar, and his remote control of that system. So we don't have all those pieces anymore, which actually helped to clean up the Spark. It actually helped to protect the Spark with kickback prevention and so on. But it would be fun to do.
So Joe, why the name Betsy? Give us the history on that.
I'm not exactly sure where the term old Betsy came from. I'm sure it's probably in some literature somewhere, or it's just a name that Hiram came up with. I don't believe there's anyone in his family with that name, whether it be a regular name or a nickname, and I could be wrong, but in what I've read, it's just always been referred to as old Betsy. So I think this is just something he decided to come up with as a name. I don't believe that's something that we had actually come up with.
Okay, very good. Other questions? It's an open forum with Joe Garcia, NJ1Q up at W1AW.
Joe, Carol Perry here.
Hi, Carol.
Hi, thank you for a wonderful, wonderful experience this evening. I loved it. I am wondering, it occurred to me while I was watching your excellent tour, do you have an outreach program to local schools where you invite classes of young people to come in and tour?
That when we did have tours, kind of. We have our lifelong learning program, and I think Carol, are you not involved with that a little bit with our lifelong learning, or you will be with a lifelong learning program? It's now run by Chris Bickle, and one of the things that is geared towards this is a youth outreach. Now, we've always opened up at the station and sometimes headquarters to local schools to allow them to bring students in. And we do have, again, when we had visitors, we would actually have a couple of schools that every year would bring their classes here for tours. And generally, it was a technical class. It could have been a science class or a robotics class. We had, and Parsca was involved with it, one of the local the trade schools. I would get the students here to take a tour. We actually have two colleges where they have technical courses that actually bring their classes here for a tour of W1AW and specifically the laboratory. They don't really go into the other parts of the organization because, again, they're mostly geared towards the technical side. But we do have these programs, and they're being developed right now, to increase and improve the outreach going to these schools, as well as the local clubs, to really get them involved, to bring younger people into amateur radio. But as you know, it's a tough sell, and there's still a little bit of competition there. I mean, I have my phone here. Now, I say this is a tool, but I can also VNC into a Raspberry Pi I have operating in Rhode Island if I want to do some remote operating. So it's a tool. And I think we're, with people such as yourselves, as yourself, as well as other individuals out there that have been the innovators, that have been the people that have been working in the trenches in both the clubs and the schools, we are able to get these young people involved, to show them that amateur radio is not just your grandpa's hobby. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with it and incorporate today's technology, whether it be your computer or your phone or that such. But through our lifelong learning program, we are trying to cultivate these things, yes.
Because it might be interesting to follow up after a class comes to visit and gets a talk, which I assume you do, by somebody there, who wants to come back again? Have the teacher set up a liaison, perhaps, to see who's interested in what they saw as a result of that tour.
Right, and oh, and that's actually part of our TI, our Teachers Institutes. You know, we will get the teachers here for TI1 and TI2. We usually have a TI1 is held here. We didn't have one this year because of COVID-19. And there's usually one here, and there's one during, Dayton. There is a course there as well. And so we will encourage the teachers, especially if they're local, to bring their classes here. And so in my speaking with the TI, because we do demonstrations here as part of the TI, and the TI is here. So we do work with Chris and Allie in lifelong learning. We try to get metrics from those teachers to see, okay, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? What can we do to improve it? And if you were to bring your students in, which you have had some teachers do that, they've actually brought their students here, if they're in Connecticut. What do you do to follow it up? Do you test the kids? Do you introduce more radio to them? And that's actually part of the TI. So there is some form of that. And again, I think because now we have this brand new system, this brand new program through lifelong learning, that's all in the mix. It's not to say that when we had our education activities, it didn't exist, but I think now because we have Chris, who is an educator himself, he understands that you just don't give them a license and say, okay, bye, see you later, here's your HT. There has to be follow-up. And so that's one of the things we're working on.
Super, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Joe. Other questions for Joe, NJ1Q up at ARRL W1AW.
Yeah, this is Bob, Kate FEY from MCARC. And I just want to say thank you very, very much for showing us around the station. I've been a ham for 50 some years, and I have wanted for so many years to come up to the station. And of course, I'm now retired, which means I could come up to the station, but the pandemic took care of that. But anyway,
Yeah, I hear you.
It's been wonderful.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you.
And it's great to have you here, Bob. I hope you come back to a future MCARC meeting. We're just thrilled to have you along with us. And I'm a life member of PCARS, and that club goes deep with me as well. So any other questions? Other questions for Joe?
I have one. Is there any way you can just lower his mask for like 10 seconds just so we can see what he looks like?
I have to make sure they're 6 feet, so. That's the smile, yes, that's the smile.
He's a great looking station manager.
You old softy tongue.
Other questions for Joe and NJ1Q?
Hey, Joe, I can almost hear Mercer County starting to groan because I just bludgeoned them with a 45-minute talk about the Raspberry Pi. But what are you doing with the Raspberry Pi?
Well, here at WNAW, I have a Raspberry Pi that is now our IRLP controller. I did have an old PC that was running CentOS 5, and our IT department didn't support it. It crashed. I couldn't get another one. So it's like, well, you know what? We have the Raspberry Pi. It runs Linux. IRLP is Linux-based, kind of, sort of. And so now I actually have a Raspberry Pi, which is used as the controller for our RLP node 4292. Now we have the node here primarily for emergency communications if we ever need to get into an affected area. But also I've had visitors use it because they can access it through 2 meters to connect to their club in their home state. So that's what we do there. At home, I have my family actually lives in Rhode Island because our son is going to school there. And I have a Raspberry Pi running Stretch. And I'm using that to run WSJTX under the Linux platform. And so when it's kind of funny, but if I'm monitoring it, I will VNC into it, and I'm looking at it, or from at home here when I live in Plainville, Connecticut, I'm running FT8 because I live in an apartment, I can't do a lot. And I see somebody that says CQ Rhode Island, well, I'll just kind of remote into it and try to work them from there. So I actually have the Pi there. Now with that Raspberry Pi, I stuck it on a piece of aluminum and actually got an old laptop screen, a regular like 15-inch laptop screen with a video driver. And so now I would call that my Pi Top because it looks like a laptop except it's running the Raspberry Pi. And so I use that for my other communications as well. And usually when I'm there, I will go on 10 meters and run a whisper beacon just to see how propagation's going. So for those out there that might think that HQ staff, we don't do a lot of radio, well, that's true. There's a lot of staff here who may be licensed but not very active. But a lot of us, including my night operator, Scott, we are still very active in amateur radio because it's fun to do.
It's
Okay,
what you love.
I was just curious. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Joe. Other questions for Joe, NJ1Q? Well, Joe, we want to thank you. I know this is extraordinary time outside of your normal working hours, but I speak on the behalf of the Mercer County Amateur Radio Club. This was a phenomenal evening. We were so glad to have you here tonight. And thank you so much for taking your time. And thank you so much for your dedication to W1AW and to the American Radio Relay League. And we wish you continued success. And we can't wait until this whole pandemic is over and you can get visitors back there, and let's get life back to normal, Joe.
Tim, 100%, I agree with that. Again, not having visitors allows us to do a lot of stuff that I normally would not be able to do. But on the other hand, WNW needs her visitors. Yes, I can get on the air when I'm not on the clock, but it's not the same because it's the visitors that actually bring in that life, whether it be a seasoned amateur radio operator or somebody brand new to get them on the air. So I too look forward to when we can get the station back on the air. And actually, this is fun. Before COVID, before Zoom, we've been doing a lot of Skype presentations, but now Zoom has actually been working quite well for us. And I actually have another presentation next week with the, it's the club out of Ohio. It's the INKY club. They're Ohio or West Virginia and Kentucky. That's another large club. So we're going to be doing another presentation next week with them via Zoom. So these are actually a lot of fun to do because I can present the station. I know that staff will usually go out to conventions and so on, and they can do these things, but we're finding that these types of presentations are actually better because we can actually physically show them stuff, whether it be here at WNW or in the laboratory or even other places in the organization as well. So again, Tim, thank you very much for this opportunity to present W1AW to Mercer County ARC.
Okay, Joe, last chance for any questions you might have for Joe. Okay, Joe, thanks very much. Go enjoy the rest of your Tuesday evening. And thanks very much. And we hope to hear you on the air. 73 from Mercer County, Western Pennsylvania.
73, Tim, and 73, everybody else. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
And as we do on Thursday nights, and last week on Thursday, there was a new